Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. Today is June the 11th, 2026. It's been a few uh, days, several days, since the raiding and then arrest of CIA conman David J. Rush, who, you know, happened to have fabricated his entire resume. I've done videos discussing his numerous fabrications. Of course, the media has had mixed coverage. They've been mainly focused on the fact that he had $40 million in gold bullion and $2 million in currency. 35 luxury watches, mostly Rolexes, were found in his home. They haven't focused on the fact that a man with a completely fabricated, invented resume not only snuck into the nation's premier intelligence uh, agency, but also rose all the way to the top, becoming a member of the elite senior executive service, which is the highest cadre of the U.S. Federal Civil Service. He was on a member of that's President Trump's Intelligence Advisory Board. He's said to have had a close working relationship with the incumbent um, Deputy Secretary of the Defense. That's Stephen Feinberg, who's the number two man of the Department of Defense. And he's also, by the way, a billionaire. I don't know if that's relevant, but of course, all of this is still unfolding. I know while all of this is going on, many of us are probably, waiting to see what Hollywood curates, I guess, of the CIA version of Catch Me If You Can. Um, in the meantime, though, many of us are also watching, getting the information from the media and seeing how journalists uh, depict what's going on. That's how they curate the story, how they construct the narrative. Certainly, because it deals with the intelligence community. A lot of what will eventually come out will probably turn out, will probably be made up, and there will be a cover up. It's of course one. It's definitely one for the history books. One for Hollywood, definitely. How a con artist pull wool over the eyes of the CIA. But in any event, today what I want to do is talk about um, authority figures, right? The outing of authority figures and how they're treated, in the media. This won't be the only person. He's not going to be the first person. He won't be the last authority figure who constructed an entirely fictitious history. By the way, in the U.S., it's not a crime, right, to fabricate your history, right? It's not a crime in the United States. It's protected in the First Amendment. Um, I I came across the story of Maria 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 Sophie Hingst, who was a German historian. She had a PhD in history. She was a very brilliant woman, but she fabricated, constructed false narratives of her being Jewish and a descendant of Holocaust victims, people who died in the Holocaust. It turned out she was not even Jewish. She was German. She had no Jewish ancestry. Uh, and There was a journalist from Der Spiegel named Martin Derry who would publish an article in June of 2019 titled "The Historian Who Invented 22 Holocaust Victims." About a month after that, on July 17, 2019, Maria Maria Sophie Hingst committed suicide. She took her own life. Of course, there was a backlash, a blowback concerning journalistic ethics about, and it depended on where, um, it depended on the location of the speakers, right? The commentators, right? If they were Anglophone, they focused on the mental health of Maria Sophie Hingst, and they censured the media for not considering um, her humanity and possible mental health crisis that caused her to commit the fraud. In certain places, in Europe actually, claiming to be a Holocaust survivor is a crime if it's linked to receiving benefits, because Germany pays reparations, various forms of reparations. It can come in pensions or direct compensation from actual victims, whatnot. I won't get into the details of that, but it depends on the relationship. So again, but in the U.S., fabricating a victim history, a tragic history of victimhood, is not a crime. Americans do it regularly. But something that came out of the suicide of Maria Sophie Hingst was concern over journalistic ethics. That fraudsters, con artists. It didn't matter that they were authority figures. Like in the case of Maria Sophie Hingst, she had a PhD in history. She was a very brilliant person. She won several awards as a result of the fabrications and false claims of being Jewish, a descendant of victims of the Holocaust. She had 240,000 subscribers to a blog. She created a blog. She won different various awards. She even won a Financial Times award. So she became like an authority figure. She became popular as a result of her fiction, right? Um, but again, there was a blowback about um, the way journalistic ethics, right? The canons of journalism. How journalists, you know, um, might demonstrate more restraint in how they treat con artists, right? Because it can have a terrible blowback, like in the case of Maria Sophie Hingst, who committed suicide. In America, we've had, again, in America, con artists who commit fraud, who just want to invent their history. Again, that's protected by the First Amendment. But if it's linked to some kind of financial benefit, then of course they're, they're punishing the fraud, the deception to receive money under false pretenses. Uh, this guy is there's a reason. In the case of the CIA official, David Rush, who is currently under arrest, he is the current charge is for theft of government property. Now, for government officials, it's different, right? There's a law that's 18 USC Section 1001. Making false statements, right, in government records is a crime. So for government officials, it's different, right? Providing a fraudulent history, it's actually a crime. But for members of the public, it's different. There have been many instances of people who fabricated their history. There was the Holocaust survivor in Pennsylvania, a man called Joseph. Uh, uh, no, the alleged Holocaust survivor. He lied, right, about being a Holocaust survivor. I think his name was Joseph Hertz. Um, he fabricated having escaped from, was it Auschwitz or something. So he wasn't punished. He wasn't prosecuted for it, at least by America. There's the case of Rachel, was it Dolezal, who was briefly an instructor who was a white woman who misrepresented her identity as black, right? There's Jessica Krug, who was actually a history professor at my alma mater, George Washington University. She was a tenured associate professor for about 8 years. Um, she was a white Jewish woman who darkened her skin, created a false identity, identified as black, right? Obviously, they were getting benefits, right? Because they became authority figures, spokespeople for talking against racism and whatnot. One of them became president of their local chapter of the NAACP. So, but they weren't criminally prosecuted again because they did it in their civilian capacity, their capacity as civilians, and it's protected under the First Amendment. Now, there was also the case of Bernie Madoff, right? If people can remember Bernie Madoff pulled off the largest Ponzi scheme in history, bilking the public of over $65 billion. Um, Interestingly, Bernie Madoff was an authority figure. He not only had a private large asset management firm that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme, but he had been chairman of the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. The NASDAQ Stock Exchange is one of the most reputable stock exchanges that we have in America, in the world. Elon Musk, who is richest man in the world, approaching $1 trillion, his companies are quoted on NASDAQ, right? Right. So Bernie Madoff went to jail for fraud, right? His son, one of his sons, ended up committing suicide, and it's the backlash, right? The blowback, the fallouts, the repercussions on the con artists and their family. Um, how the how media the media publications, the broadcast, and then the public outrage that humiliates the con artists and people associated with them. Do we have a responsibility? Does society have a responsibility um, with respect to victim cosplay, right? You can call it victim cosplay. Um, you know, and I'm going to do another video because I wanted to delve deeper into the case of Marie Sophie Hingst. I find it interesting because I was a Holocaust study fellow at Columbia University. Um, and it was very interesting. In fact, in the studies that I did, the Holocaust study fellowship at the Institute for Israel and Jewish Studies. By the way, I didn't have to be claimed that I was Jewish to get the Holocaust study fellowship. No, um, even though I was the only black person in that class, I was the only black person in the class. There was an Indian person who were the only people um, who were not Jewish descent in the course. But I read about many people who had fabricated their identities as being Jewish or being Holocaust survivors. So there have been many instances of this. So I'm going to do another video and talk about the journalist um, who outed Maria Sophie Hingst, and then the backlash. Now, again, Martin Dury was the journalist who outed her. He was one of several people who outed her because, several people in the Jewish community, there were lawyers, there were researchers who started to study her because she became very notorious, very popular, very famous, and she continued to now amplify her stories, right? For instance, at some point she said she claimed she founded a hospital in India, right? She gave sex education, blah blah blah. So she started inventing things that people knew never happened, and so there are now researchers looking into her background, and this was over a 6-year period. But once Martin Dury, who wrote for the Spiegel, once he published his piece, that was the historian who invented 22 Holocaust victims, right? Once he published that, and there was this huge blowback, right, in the media, from the public, and then she turned to being a victim, right? She started becoming a victim, at least, and then, a month after, she'd committed suicide. Um, Again, in America, these things are treated differently. Bernie Madoff's son committed suicide, right? Bernie Madoff's son committed suicide. One of his sons died of cancer. They say stress can induce cancer, right? Bernie Madoff, of course, was sentenced to life in prison, and he died in prison. He was in his 80s, when he died. So I'm gonna, I find it interesting that we should be able to discuss. I'd like to discuss con artists, authority figures who turned out to be con artists, and how the media treats them, and the public outrage. Should society be concerned, for their mental health? Last month was mental health, and in the case of Marie Sophie Hingst, whose mental health obviously spiraled, and it took a nosedive, and she ended up losing her life. Now, when con authority figures who are con artists, when they uh, commit fraud and misrepresent themselves, right, fabricate their identity, their history, when they turn out to be con artists, it's not their atrocities, right? They don't occur in a vacuum, right? They long like they are not the singular um, targets, or they're not the singular source targets of the fallout, the blowback from their fraud, right? From their falsifications. Um, there's an institution, right? There's an institution that suffers as a result, um, because their fabrications, their fraud sometimes just becomes fodder for um, for the um, for the ending, for the punishment, or for the destruction of an institution that they represent. In the case of Marie Sophie Hingst, right? They're Holocaust deniers. They're people who are Holocaust deniers, and obviously, when someone like her, who became an authority figure, right, and she received all sorts of awards for claiming to be uh, Jewish and a descendant of Holocaust survivors, when she was not even Jewish at all. She was German. She was a complete white. She had no Jewish ancestry. People who are Holocaust deniers, they are able to, gain more ammunition to attack this whole institution of, sympathizing with victims of the Holocaust, or memorializing the Holocaust. In the case of the CIA, there have been people who've been calling out that of the CIA, calling the government to actually scrap the CIA, that it's like a criminal enterprise. In fact, former CIA officers do this now, right? They get on podcasts and say, "Look, the CIA is a criminal organization. Its template, is like it's built like a terrorist cell, blah blah blah. They commit all sorts of crimes, and that it should be scrapped." When someone who who has a fabricated resume, right? And we don't know if it's a spoof. We don't know if it's some kind of, uh, you know, we don't know what's going on. And he makes it all the way to being a leader in the CIA, a member of the senior executive service, and he's defrauding, creating false spy programs, defrauding the American taxpayers. $40 million in gold found in his home, $2 million in cash, right? A public official with 35 Rolexes, luxury wristwatches, most of them Rolexes. Uh, that's just adding fodder, right? Adding fodder for, you know, the the destruction of, for those calls for the end of the CIA, right? Criticizing the CIA. Uh, in the case of Bernie Madoff, who happened to have been chairman of Nasdaq Stock Exchange at one time, right? One of the preeminent stock exchanges in the world, in America, right? The symbol of Wall Street finance. Those who criticize Wall Street, who call for, well, more regulations is good, but there are people who want an end, who want to put an end to Wall Street. Of course, this is that Bernie Madoff, his atrocities, his fraud, the Ponzi scheme. That was grist to the mill, right? That was grist for the mill. That's what critics look for, right? Critics, this is just ammunition for them. This is evidence. Call it, that call for the end, the destruction of whatever institution they represent, right? So these con artists, their actions are not, you know, they're not in isolation. Even if they didn't defraud or take money from anybody, um, they are not. They're not really so much. They're not so much committing victimless crimes. Society, we like to think about, oh, was there a victim of the crime? Was there a direct victim of the crime? Bernie Madoff, that's not who I'm talking about. Obviously, he defrauded a lot of people. But again, with respect to mental health, the repercussions, consider how the media treats the con artist David Rush. That's the CIA con man, right? It's outrageous, even conceiving that a member of the intelligence community could have just fabricated his entire resume and been there for 17 years. They don't know yet if he's a mole. I think he's a mole, or there's a mole who facilitated his rise, his entry and his rise within the intelligence community, within the CIA. um it's you know it's concerning, and of course the public should be concerned, uh, should be outraged, right? There should be a media outcry. But I've noticed it looks like the media is being very cautious. I for a long time I wondered if he was married, right? I didn't know if he was married because he was raided in his home. There was nothing in the media and the news concerning his family that, well, okay, they raided him, the FBI raided him. What happened to his family? What about his family? Recently, I saw it yesterday in the news and the papers that he does have family. So his family's been protected. What if a situation arises that, well, if David Rush, God forbid, commits suicide, right, while in detention? Is the media responsible, right? Uh, society, we can create laws. Can society then create laws punishing the way the media treated the subject matter? So, what about if members of his family, like Bernie Madoff's son, who committed suicide, he hanged himself? God forbid, in the case of David Rush. But I think I appreciate the fact that the media has left his family out of it, right? So we don't know his wife's name, we don't know his kids, we don't know how many kids he has, we don't know any of this. So those people, the innocent people, they deserve to be protected, especially in this period of the turbulence that besiege mental health of Americans. But in any event, I'm going to stop this video here and do another video discussing the story of Marie Sophie Hingst, which was kind of interesting, and other people who have been con artists you know, and just taking a look at how the media, uh, covered their fraud and the blowback, the fallout. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.